All right, so I think we are ready to go. It's probably the first one we're actually starting close to on time, which is noon. We've got folks on and already, and with the recording, I think we can go ahead, and if people jump on late, they can catch the first part of this when it gets posted.
Excellent. Well,
turn it over to you, Brian.
Please. Welcome, everybody. And as always, we thank everybody for making the time. Please definitely use the chat to put, or the Q&A to put your questions so we can make it as interactive as possible. I'm Brian Armstrong with Strongwell Property Management in Keller Williams, Vermont. And we have Angela Zukowski, who does so much for all our property owners. Thank you very much, Angela. And Alan, you're going to be talking to us about one of the most exciting topics we've had yet. How can you help us navigate some of this, what's happening, and be better, better stewards of our property out there and help our residents, as well as possibly move the needle a little bit with the state.
Terrific.
So welcome, Alan. I think for way of background, for those of you that don't know, Alan is a landlord and is also an attorney, and he has been sort of leading the charge on asking the state to change some regulations that went into effect in the fall or last year?
October of 2022.
Okay, so just this past fall. For those who aren't aware, the state took over the management of the federal lead paint laws, and so they issued some regulations, and there's some inconsistencies in those regulations, which is what this new lead legislation is intended to deal with. So Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk more about this, like what the issue is, what's happening, of what the problem is.
Terrific, thank you. So I do have a presentation. The presentation is probably about 20 minutes. If you have questions in the meantime, we can get into those, or if you just want to see the presentation and then talk about afterward, that'd be fine. But yes, so I am an attorney. I do have less than a dozen rental properties, and I was also in the legislature for 3 terms back in the 90s. And so when this issue arose, I first learned about it when I needed to get my updated training for the IRC certification, and started to delve into it. And this is what I found. So first, let's start with a very short history of lead control. Lead used to be in all kinds of things, gasoline, pencils, paint, etc. In 1978, it was banned from most paint. So paint that you would buy at the store that you could put on your on a wall or the outside of the house. They still have lead in paint for like bridges, so don't go sticking your tongue on a bridge. In 1993, Vermont was one of the very first states to adopt lead safety measures. And that was the EMP, or the essential maintenance practices program. And then in 2010, the EPA adopted its regulations, and those regulations also allow the states to take over and preempt the federal regs. In 2018, Vermont passed H 736, which authorized the health department to enact comprehensive regulation on lead regulation. And the Department of Health testified in the legislature, and they drew the distinction between contractors who are professional painters working for hire versus landlords and childcare operators. The new regulations that came out in October are different from what they told the state they were going to do, in that they put contractors and landlords into the same category, and childcare was exempt. So this is the memo that Shayla Livingston from the Department of Health circulated in the legislature in 2018. And on the back of it, you'll see there are the 3 categories that we're talking about. Contractors and property managers had to be licensed and had to have certain things present on the job. Property owners and childcare operators were both said to be allowed to work on their own properties without a license, but they just had to take the training. So they had to be certified as having done the training. And if you go and hire somebody else, then you would have to hire somebody who was licensed. So when the legislature enacts a regulation, they have to come back through the legislature and go to something called the Legislative Committee on Administrative Rules, or LCAR. And when they do that, they have to provide analysis, including economic impact and who they reached out to and what the comments were. And so when the health department came to the LCAR for the 2022 rule, this is what they said. They said that property owners of pre-78 rental properties should see very minimal difference. The individuals that do this work will see a minor increase of about $50 a year in fees. In as much as everybody is in this business is a small business, there'd be very little negative economic impact. And what they're now telling the public is that if you were EMP or IRC, the inspection, repair, and cleaning practices certified, you actually need to get a license, and you need to get both a firm license and a supervisor license, unless you qualified under the uncompensated childcare certificate. So in reality, the difference was not the $50 difference that they told LCAR. In order to sand more than 1 square foot, interior or exterior, on a property rented to somebody else, you need to undergo the training, including the 2-hour training and an 8-hour training that costs between $250 and $300. You need to get the RRPM, that's renovation, repair, painting, and maintenance, firm license, which you pay $300, and it's good for 5 years. You need to buy the RRPM supervisor license for $50 a year. And here's the most important part. You have to have specialty painting contractor insurance. Your regular insurance is not going to cover it. And so we're going to go into that in detail next, but the impact is not $50 a year. It's more like between $2,500 and $3,000 a year in order to comply. And then every 5 years, you got to do it again. And non-compliance is a violation of $5,000 per violation per day. So I said we're going to go into insurance. So here we go. There are standardized insurance policy types, and they are published by a company called the Insurance Services Office, or the ISO. For rental properties, you will see the ISO HO 3 and 5. These are these are policies that cover single-family residences, accessory dwelling units, owner-occupied duplexes. The HO 6 covers individual condos. I rent an individual condo. This is not the master policy, but for the condo itself. And then you have the business owner policy, which covers non-owner occupied duplexes, triplexes, quads, apartment buildings, etc. For contractor insurance, you have 2 that are applicable here. One is commercial general liability, the CGL, and that excludes professional services unless it's specifically endorsed. So you would go to an insurance company and say, I would like a CGL policy and I want to do painting. And they would give you a CGL policy with a special endorsement for painting. And then you have the contractor insurance, which is non-medical professional liability insurance. So looking at these policies that cover most landlords and what most landlords have, pardon me, we're going to start with the HO5. And it's a standard form. You have Section 2 has liability coverage. Section 2 exclusions, excluded from personal liability and med payments are professional services. And professional services are bodily injury or property damage arising out of the rendering or failure to render a professional service. So if you're an electrician, for example, and you go and you do some work on somebody's house and a fire starts and they get injured, your homeowner's insurance is not going to cover your professional liability. That's what this exemption is talking about. The HO6 is the condo form, exact same thing, liability coverage, exclusions, And along the exclusions are professional services, exactly like in the HO 3 and 5 policies. Then you have the business owner's policy. This is again for larger apartment buildings. You have exclusions. It does not apply to professional services. The exact same language that you saw in the other two. So what are professional services? Vermont statute has two definitions. They're not directly applicable to this arena, but they're illustrative. There's there's no definition specifically related to insurance that exists in statute. But basically, in Title 11, you have a definition that says professional service is something that basically requires a license. You have a second section, also in Title 11, that says professional services are those that can only lawfully be rendered by a person who's licensed. And there is a case in Vermont, Maine Mutual versus Tinker and Fedor. Tinker was a licensed surveyor, and he was hired by the Kennys to survey a property boundary line. And based on that survey, the Kennys cut down trees that were on Fedor's land. So he was sued by a neighbor who claimed the survey was incorrect. Maine Mutual sought a declaratory judgment that the business owner policy covering Tinker excluded professional services. And because he was a licensed surveyor and the liability arose from his survey activities, his claim was excluded. So it wasn't covered by the business owner's policy. So that is the problem with the business owner's policy and the RRPM activities. So let's talk a little bit about the statute that was enacted. The statute, in key part, it's 1752, differentiates between D and E. And so Section D says that people who are not performing services for compensation have to take the training and become certified. People who are holding themselves out for compensation have to become licensed. These activities that they're talking about include disturbing any painted surface in a rental property or a childcare. In order to become licensed, you need to have insurance, and that insurance has to cover a person who suffers damage from lead-based paint activities or the repair, renovation, repair, painting, and maintenance activities, and at least $300,000. So here are the Vermont regulations for lead control, and they define it in two different ways down here in 7.1. There's two sentences there. The first relates to all child cares and target housing. Now, target housing is any housing, owner occupied or not, that was built prior to 78. And there you can't disturb more than 1 square foot of interior space or more than 20 square feet outside without a license. And if it's a rental target housing or a child care facility, then that limit drops to 1 square foot inside or 1 square foot outside. So you can't perform any of the RRPM services unless you either have a license or you have the childcare exemption. So for a license, you're required to show that you have insurance, and that insurance has to have the ability to indemnify a person who suffers damage from lead-based paint operations in either $300,000 or a surety bond. Let me go back here and show you. You can also see underneath that highlighted area, the child care exemption just says that they will not perform these services for hire, and they have to say specifically which properties they own. So what's the upshot? The upshot is that rental properties are all covered by ISO, HO, and BOP policies. these policies all exclude coverage for professional services. Professional services are those that require a license to perform them. The regulations require landlords to become licensed to paint their own property. This licensure requirement cancels the insurance liability protection in the policy. And what I'm finding, and I'd be interested if there are some other landlords on here that have looked into this, I can't even get professional contractor licensing for working with lead paint. And the reality is they just say, you're not a professional, you're an amateur. You paint, 2 apartments a year at most. So you might say, well, can I just hire a licensed contractor to do the painting? To which I'd say, good luck. As of January 1st, you had less than 35 licensed contractors statewide in Vermont. Only 7 for all of Chittenden County, 2 in Addison County, 2 in Franklin County. There are no licensed contractors in Grand Isle, Orange, or Windsor counties. Washington County just had 1, Capstone Community Action, which doesn't hold themselves out for hire. And Middlebury College is one of the 2 in Addison County. Again, they don't offer services to the general public. So we've reached out to the health department and said, hey, you didn't do what you said you're going to do. Can you fix this? And what they basically say is no, that we can't make an exception for landlords to paint their own properties, because then the EPA would not approve our regulation. Well, we have looked at the other regulations. There's 14 states now that have taken over the regulation. And this is the list of them. And so we took a look at their regulations. And so let's start with Georgia. Georgia exempts from their certification requirement anybody who is doing the painting activity in a property that they own that is vacant, basically. So it accepts activities within residential dwellings that they own unless it's occupied by a person other than the owner while the activities are being performed, which basically means you can paint the apartment when it's empty. So that's Georgia. Iowa, same thing. Also, the EPA approved these regulations by other states, and it has the exemption for landlords to be able to paint while the apartment is vacant. Oklahoma, exact same language as Georgia. Utah, exact same language. These are states that have all been able to enact this regulation exemption that the state of Vermont is not willing to do. This is Washington. So the solution, we think, is something that we put into a bill, H-184, which is now pending in the House in front of the General and Housing Committee. It clarifies that Section D that we looked at that said uncompensated, we're saying that includes owners of rental housing. And so the actual thing is to add a sentence to Section D that says individuals performing for no compensation includes the owner of rental housing performing services on your own property. So you're not holding yourself out for hire. So in conclusion, I think that the new lead regulation does not conform with the authorizing statute. It does not conform with what the department said that they were going to do. The EPA has approved several other state regulations that allow landlords to paint their own rental properties. And H-184 will require that residential landlords be treated the same as childcare operators. You'll still have to receive the full 8-hour training. You'll still have to pass a written exam. You still have to use lead safe work practices and special HEPA equipment, and not hold yourself out for hire to other people. So my website, we have a website, sugarhousevt.com, and on that website, there is a link to a special page for this issue. I would recommend that people go to that and keep an eye on it. We'll keep it updated as the bill starts to move through the legislative process, and also provide resources for other people that are interested in getting involved, such as if you are willing to speak to your House or Senate member, there's material there that you can use. And finally, there is on the end of this presentation an opinion piece that describes exactly what I said, but just in 500 words instead of 20 minutes, which is perfectly suitable for handing to your legislator or anybody that you can get interested in this to vote for the bill. And I don't know how your process works, Angela and Brian, of distributing materials, but this is available on the website that I referenced to. So that's the presentation, and I look forward to a conversation.
Alan,
So-
thank you very much. Very detailed. Angela, please.
Yeah, I was gonna say, and I think, again, this is another call for action for landlords and people within the community, realtors and other folks to get involved. And Alan has created a very nice sort of roadmap and packet of information and materials. And the way that things get moved through the legislature and the way they get attention is when representatives and senators start hearing from their constituents about an issue. And it doesn't take very many. It can take a couple. And, to them, that's getting their attention. So, what I would strongly encourage everybody to do is reach out to those folks that represent you down in Montpelier and talk to them about this bill and why this change is so important. We keep hearing that we have a housing crisis in the state of Vermont. This is a type of regulation that is not going to help that. In fact, it's going to potentially make it worse and could cause units to come offline completely. If a landlord can't find somebody to paint or to deal with, lead issues at the property.
I've heard that.
Interesting. Go ahead, Alan.
Angela, I've heard that particularly with regard to ADUs. So people are willing to sort of consider opening up a unit in their home. But when you start putting a lot of burden on them and treat them all like they're, professional 100-unit property operators, they just shy away and close down and say, I don't want to do it. Right.
And I think the other piece that we've been hearing a lot about is how unaffordable rental properties are. I mean, Alan broke down the additional costs that a landlord is going to have to deal with. Those are significant. And those get passed into the cost to rent in the state of Vermont, which means rents go up, which means it's harder for people to find a place to live that doesn't cost a huge amount of money. And it just adds to this rent burden that we keep hearing about. So it's unfortunate that there was consideration given for childcare under the argument that we're in a childcare crisis, but the same consideration wasn't given to rental properties, despite what all of us have been hearing and seeing. So
yeah, we did put the information for the document in the chat, and Angela, if you don't object, we can actually send it out to the members who are on today.
Yeah, it's fine.
We'd be happy to do that. And it's interesting, Alan, when you speak about ADUs, I didn't even think about that in your presentation, which shame on me. But that's going to actually really have an effect too, in the sense that there's realtors and property managers, but anybody, I would argue, is a licensed real estate agent needs to be disclosing this information to help our clients minimize their liability. And that's going to turn some people off from the opportunity to build wealth to the program, because if we're talking about $2,000 to $3,000 a year, we're seeing some people at the elevated prices buying duplexes with really not much more than that for profit per year. And I know it's about providing safe housing first and foremost, yet this is one of the last bastions of opportunity for Americans to build wealth. Yeah, this is pretty impactful.
And I think, this is another situation. I get a lot of really similar questions about the just cause, not to keep going back to the just cause regulations. But this is part of the problem that we're having with these just cause charter changes is the actual ordinances themselves have not been written. And so this is one of the things that we're concerned about as we're talking about these issues is the charter change says we're going to build this ordinance within this framework. And then it goes back to the local municipality to build the ordinance within that framework. But as we can see, it's very easy for folks to sort of spread it out too far and not quite be under what they've been authorized to do. I mean, here's the Department of Health going further in the scope than what they have indicated all the way along till it came to regulation time. Right? Don't worry, don't worry, don't worry. We're going to exempt rental property. Then we get to the rental, then we get to actual regulation and, oh, look, no, they didn't.
And Alan, I appreciate you reading through the entire thing. I can see that must have taken some time. We certainly have some questions. So if you guys don't mind, I'll actually read one of them right now. From an anonymous attendee, start the question. So I have been EMP for several years now and have submitted my own EMPs. As it seems that this cert is no longer any good, parentheses, as likely several other landlords are facing, end parentheses, who is handling the new version of the certification? Environmental contractors? And lastly, are they all up to speed on being certified to review properties every year?
So I can take that one.
Excellent.
If you obtained your original EMP certification within the last 5 years, you can still file the new property inspection report until you've hit 5 years, and then you need to take the new IRC training. I would recommend just go take the IRC training. It's online. It's $10. They offer it, several times a week, I think. So it's very easy to do, and you get a certificate. And a property owner does not need to do all of the things that we're talking about today in order to just do the inspections. But once you do an inspection, if you discover an area that needs to be dealt with, you either need to become licensed if you want to do it yourself, or you need to find one of the 35 licensed people in the state who will return your call.
Right. And we may see more painting contractors getting licensed before we hit painting season, but again, we don't know.
There are more being licensed every month, but at 35, you're not going to get. There's about 60,000 properties that are rental properties built prior to 78. It's going to take a few hundred contractors before you're able to actually get one to paint during the season. And God help you if you have an emergency, like a pipe burst, had that, and you need to go in and disturb more than 1 square foot of wall in order to fix it.
Yeah, and this has got me on my toes, both as a real estate agent as well as a property management company owner, because I think there's some in-betweens that, Alan, as you pointed out, won't really get tested until somebody files suit. We have another question from Marsha Marble. Trying to locate a licensed contract to do I assume she meant contractor, to do exterior repairs on a single family rental. I contacted 4 who are Department of Health. 1 responded with a quite high bid that the owner is considering. So it seems more like an FYI, but these 35, and I respect them, it's the capitalist system for better or for worse, are probably going to realize that they're in demand. So I wouldn't be surprised if their rates are going up for understandable and justifiable reasons. One more question, since that seemed like a statement. Sheila Jacobs, I have an EMP since 2009. I think so. I had to take the VDH class to upgrade to the new IRC certificate. It's totally doable. I guess another statement as well. Yeah, I think, Alan, you make a great point. We might as well go out and spend them, that $10 and get that class taken. Angela, we may be able to provide some value as well by potentially seeing to some insurance companies that will help with the appropriate coverage for our members and people who are doing this work, such as property management companies.
Possibly, but I think, as Alan's identified, insurance companies have pretty rigid categories of things that they insure. And if something's slightly outside of that, it's sort of a do not compute, like does not process. We don't know. We're going to send you to excess lines, right? Folks who've rented to students over the years have run into this. We're going to send you to Lloyd's of London. Your insurance is going to be 4 times what you would pay normally because we don't know what to do with you. We're going to view you as high risk. And I think the other challenging piece here is that landlords who are performing EMPs and have, these trainings have a level of liability coverage in the statute itself. So it seems sort of circular that we have to have insurance for something that we have protection from liability for in the statute. So.
Alan, are there any key people within Montpelier that we should respectably reach out to?
Well, certainly the bill is going to get its first hearing in the House General. So that is chaired by Tom Stevens. I've met with him, talked to him about it. But if you know any legislators that are on that committee, that is going to probably be where it will be most impactful. So I can tell you a little bit about how housing is going to go this year, from my understanding.
Please.
The Senate has started it in Keisha Ram's committee to do a comprehensive omnibus housing bill for the year. And they're mostly focused on zoning issues and some other things in the Senate. And then they're going to pass that over to the House. And the House is going to start looking at the things that they want to add to the housing bill. And that will go to House General. So after town meeting, you can expect that the House General is going to be looking at this and any other issues that they want to put into a housing bill for this year.
Right, and that Senate bill that Alan was talking about also has some funding for the VHIP program, ongoing funding for rental assistance. Like it has some other components besides sort of the zoning piece. It's a pretty large bill. I'll get it up on the Landlords Association website in the legislative section. That's where all of these bills are posted, so folks can see it. And, I think the concern is that when we have these large omnibus type bills, other things get attached to them that we don't want. This is the perfect type of bill that someone could try to slide in a statewide ban on no cause evictions because that bill has been introduced. So, these can be really tricky at times. And, I think the hope is that this gets attached to that because lots of people want that housing bill, but there's also a risk that other things could get attached to it as well.
It seems in general, after 2 or 3 somewhat quiet years, maybe not that quiet because we had Just Cause, that there's a tremendous amount that we as, property owners, property managers, and real estate agents and brokers need to be on our toes right now about. Right.
And the legislature is feeling this housing crisis and is feeling this housing crunch. And they're getting a lot of pressure, I think, from constituents. They can't find housing. Employers can't get people to come here because there's no affordable housing. And unfortunately, the solution in many of these instances seems to be more regulations on landlords because that feels like it's going to solve the problem. That was pretty sarcastic. I'm just trying to be mindful that this is being recorded and will be out there and somebody will grab it as a soundbite and then I will hear it forever.
You blame it on me.
Okay. So it's concerning because I think there's some very clear paths through fixing some of these things. This type of regulation, which is going to would stop like a lot of extra charges and which impacts rent increases and ADUs coming online. Things like fixing zoning issues, some Act 250 issues that impact development, right? There's some other things here that would be super helpful. VHIP, how is VHIP going to operate if any of the contractors that are working to rehab these units have to comply with all of these lead paint rules? And we
It's
can't get the
interesting.
contractor to do the work.
You just give us, thought for potentially another session in the near future is possibly the top 4 legislative priorities. We do have a question, and then we have a statement from Kevin Petrocco. Great to have you on, my friend. Would an EMP certification filed in September 22 still be good for a year, or would an IRC need to be filed ASAP? Alan, Angela, do you have an answer for a good friend, Kevin?
I do. The requirement is that the report be filed annually. So if you filed it and you were qualified when you filed it, you have another year to decide whether or not you need to become IRC certified in order to file it. So yes, the one filed last year is fine. You've got to do it every year. When that anniversary comes around, you should go ahead and get the IRC training.
Excellent. In a statement, and then I think I have a question for you, Alan. Anonymous attendee, as you are aware, a bill's contents have to be watched right up to the end of the session. Absolutely. So this could change in the final days, if not final hours. Alan, and this is just a reflective and question and more of one of your just opinion. When you talk to, I think you said Representative Stevens, did he appear to understand the gravity of the issue, that we're required to enforce things that we can't technically do? There's not insurance coverage, and there's a lot of people in limbo.
I wouldn't say all of that. What I would say is that I didn't know him before. I introduced myself to him. I gave him a copy of this op-ed that we have available. And he knows that it's on the radar. And, I've served in the legislature before, so I know you want to let a chair know that you're interested in testifying on this issue, that you have other witnesses if they want to hear from other witnesses, and then just sort of follow it. I have been meeting with other legislators, though, including, you can see that we had a bill sponsored by 3 legislators. So Gabrielle Stevens, Tiff Bloomley, and Carol Odie. We've met with them. We've given them a much more in-depth presentation. Tiff is actually owns apartments, so she's very interested in this. I've been meeting with other representatives and senators. If anyone wants to have a meeting with a representative or a senator and they'd like me to support them, I'm happy to show up on Zoom, in person, on the phone, or whatever it takes to try and get the literacy about this issue raised in the legislature. As a legislator, I can tell you, you're dealing with 250 issues, and you need to become literate in the things that you're going to be asked to vote on. You don't need to be an expert, but you need to at least understand the background. And so that's what's important for people to get their legislators on the same page.
Right. And I think if anyone on the call is interested in testifying before the House General Committee, please reach out to Alan. I know he's coordinating some of that. It would be very helpful for them to hear from the landlords that this is going to impact. I can come in and talk all day long, and it's easy for them to write me off because I'm just the association. But when they start hearing from actual landlords, these are the things, these are the costs, these are the challenges. It's going to cause increased rent. It's going to cause us to not be able to find painters, or we can't get licensed, or we can't get certified. Deterioration of rental properties. Those are things that resonate with them. And Alan's done a very good job of giving you talking points and information and walking through this issue.
What do you think is the time frame that our members need to be cognizant of to have the most impact?
So the legislature takes town meeting week off, and if you're going to run into your legislator, it's going to be around town meeting. And they're going to want to be in the community. They're going to want to see you, talk to you at town meeting. And so I would say, starting with town meeting, really get out there and start to bring this issue to their attention and let them know that you'll be following it and paying attention to it.
Any additional questions from our members?
I was gonna say, where can folks sign up for and get the IRC training?
The Department of Health has a lead section. To tell you the truth, I've gotten all of these different links to the lead program, and they are it's not that terribly well organized.
It's not
I
the
keep finding a new
easiest.
page. I keep finding a new page I didn't know was there.
It's not the easiest website to navigate.
But if you go to the Department of Health and you search for the lead program is in the lead and asbestos program, you can drill down and find it pretty simply. And then they have a very nice, I will say, once you find the right page, they have a very nice way to just pick which time slot works for you. They have lots of openings. Pick what time slot. I think they use the same Eventbrite scheduling, and then you can attend the course.
And it may be worthwhile, Angela, for you and I connect after and see if there's certain legislators we can get on one of these meetings to actually amplify the opportunity to open up communication with them, because there are so many, important issues facing our members. And obviously most of us on here, I would confident speaking, we're looking for the balanced environment, whereas right now that does not seem like it's occurring.
Right. And, I think the really important, folks, is if you are a constituent of one of the members of the House General and Housing Committee, I would absolutely encourage you to reach out to your representative, because they're going to be taking up a lot of these housing issues. Some of them next week and a bunch more after town meeting week.
Either if you're a constituent or if you know them. I mean,
Right.
Vermont's a small state. I know
Right.
people. I know people that are reps in other towns, and just reach out to them.
And Marcia Marble made a comment: landlords and property managers are also voters, should be most effective in talking with the legislator. Absolutely. They've got to hear from many of us. I think if they heard from Angela, Alan, or myself, they'd appreciate the input, but they may not appreciate it as much, as opposed to other property managers. Even more importantly, I would argue, people who actually own the properties and manage them themselves. I'll actually also relay some of this information to Peter Tucker, who's VAR's representative, and see if we can encourage Vermont Association of Realtors, who's been very active with Peter's help, also weigh in on this.
Right, because that's potentially could impact some sales with some of the lead paint requirements. And if there's work that needs to be done and it can't be done because you can't find a contractor, could jam up some real estate sales too.
In a significant way. I think it's going to jam up not only with ADUs, but it's going to jam up rental properties that that may be coming to market through distressed sales. For example, our real estate team handles a certain amount of foreclosures with government agencies. We're being told there's a certain amount coming. A lot of those products or properties go with renovation loans. How is the renovation loan going to be able to be completed if we can't find one of the right contractors? And it's some of the toughest loans out there. And yet it also is oftentimes bringing on distressed properties to better condition for housing. So yeah, this is far more of an issue, candidly, than I expected it. So thank you, Alan, for enlightening me. It was well worth stepping off the slopes for this.
It's also a bit of a good primer of a reminder of some of the legislative processes and how those work, because while we're talking about a specific bill and a specific issue, it's the same process and it's the same sort of ask for participation from landlords and real estate professionals when other bills come through. And it's about having those communications and using those relationships you have with your representatives and senators and ones that to talk to them about these issues. You may think like, oh, they know. Nothing can take the place of that personal conversation. And that will ring with these folks because it becomes more real for them, right? they know you've come to them with a problem. It's more real than reading about it in the newspaper or, hearing things just generically. When they can hear those direct impacts, particularly to people that they know, that's powerful.
Yeah, I can't overemphasize that. When you're in the legislature, the lobbyists are people that are paid to talk to you, and you look at them through that lens. But you're there to represent your constituents. When your constituents are talking to you, you care, because they're not getting paid to talk to you. They are talking to you about a problem that they're having, and they want you to fix it. And most people want to fix the problems that are presented to them.
Right. And it doesn't take very many of people presenting the same problem to them, a couple, right? Like, Alan, if you hear, when you were in the legislature, if you heard from a couple of people about the same issue, that made you take notice, because a lot of times you don't hear from anybody.
Correct.
So
We have another question from Betty Sharon. Betty, I hope you're doing well. Does this pertain only to properties pre-78 or after? I'm assuming pre-78.
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 Pre-78. So if you're, one of the lucky ones that owns a property that was built after 78, none of this applies.
Although
with that, Angela, I've heard there's. Go ahead.
I was going to say,
please, Alan.
It applies to any building that may have a child care in it, regardless of the year.
Okay.
So if
with
you
the
have somebody
asterisk,
if you have somebody that's like, oh, I'd like to buy this house and I'd really like to, I think, this bonus room down here, we could do a child care, for a couple of kids. These new rules impact that, but they don't treat them as poorly as they do landlords of pre-78 rental housing.
And Angela, what would you say are the top 5 issues right now? Because we've talked about a bunch, and then I heard there's actually some state efforts to, I think basically push the municipalities that if they're going to allow single families to possibly even authorize duplexes in certain cases.
right? So that's part of that housing omnibus bill that Alan was talking about that just came out of Senate General. And economic development, I guess they're probably not actually Senate General. But so that omnibus housing bill, I think we can expect some traction on the rental property registry and inspection bill. So just as a quick reminder, that bill would require landlords to register their units with the state if they don't already have to through a municipality. So if you already are like part of the Burlington program or own property in Burlington, you would not have to. It's for everywhere else. And then it would move the enforcement of the rental housing health code from the Department of Health to fire safety. So it's not creating new inspections. It's not mandating, periodic inspections. It's still the complaint-based system that it is. It's just would move who's doing the inspecting from the local town health officers, which, they have a hard job and they're volunteers and they're not always well trained, to the Division of Fire Safety where there are trained inspectors. So I think we can expect some movement on that bill this year. I think we're all sort of watching what's happening with these just cause charter changes. I think after town meeting, and when we know which communities have said, yes, we want to move forward with this, I think we can expect to see all of those introduced at the same time to sort of push those forward. Those are the really big ones that I'm hearing about right now. I know there's lots of other bills that have been introduced. Sometimes bills just get introduced and nothing happens with them, though you do still have to keep an eye on them because, again, big housing omnibus bill, that's the one where sometimes these weird bills just get attached to them. So
actually, and everybody, there's a lot to say, so hopefully we'll see more beyond these. But actually, one of the things that just popped in my head is one of the things that I think a lot of our real estate agent members, could improve upon is watching that. I think there's still requirement, 99% sure it is, that at the time of sale, there's actually a Vermont rental property disclosure form that requires the seller to indicate whether or not they're in compliance. And if they're not, gives the buyers 60 days to bring the property to compliance. Right now, with everything that we discussed today, A, we should all be doing those if you're not familiar with those. And B, may even be harder for those buyers to bring it into compliance, which just sort of supports, for lack of a better phrase, the rat's nest that's been discussed today.
Right. Right.
Alan, anything from your perspective that we haven't covered, either even legislative or even on the IRC or lead in general, that comes to mind that you think would be valuable to, all our members and certainly the customers that we serve, clients?
Nothing comes to mind. This is pretty much the only bill that I'm tracking in the legislature this year, and other than that, I've got to maintain my apartments and plow snow today, and stuff like that. So it's not like I'm looking for things to get concerned about in the legislature. But I do read the bills, when they come out, and make sure that I'm staying on top of them. And there are a few housing, there is a rent control bill, and it's been submitted. But it's not uncommon for people to submit a bill so that they can proudly proclaim that they've done something,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not anticipated to go anywhere. But as Angela says, I've tacked a few bills onto other bills myself. When in the legislature, you say, when the trains are moving, get in a car,
So we do have a question, Sheila. Great to have you on today. Thank you as always for all your contributions. Sheila Jacobs, about the potential registry. Doesn't the state already have a list of units with the landlord certificates sent to them by landlords every year?
So they were supposed to, from what I understand, the Department of Taxes is not giving up that information. So while there's some sense that the Department of Taxes should have that information based on the landlord certificate filings, they are not sharing it out. So the short answer is no. For anybody that is trying to use it for housing needs or to get a sense of where rental properties are located, such as in the Department of Housing and Economic Development. But no, that's a very good question, because that was what was supposed to be used years ago. And it's not available.
I can also tell you that the Department of Health has a registry of EMP certified people. Yep. And I've obtained a copy of it.
I'm going to jump in real quick and say that list is very small compared to what we know the number of units are, and is one of the reasons why we keep seeing this registry bill come back, because landlords are not reporting their EMPs like they're supposed to, and that lead registry is not as big as it should have been. And so we've been, for a long time, the argument was use that. But people haven't filed their EMPs, and it's a very small list, and the state knows that. And so we've lost our traction in our argument with pushing on them to use that list.
Well, what I was going to say about it is that I've seen the list and I've worked with the list, and it is ridiculously out of date and not well maintained at all. And so, there's like 20,000 people on the list, and only 3,000 have filed an EMP report in the last couple of years.
Yep.
We have a statement from Sheila Jacobs, sort of a question as well. Kind of unfair. Now we might have to pay an additional $35 per unit because the tax department won't share. Sheila, I absolutely concur. It's one more reason for us to advocate. And I'm going to state something that one of my least favorite quotes ever from a mentor: fair is where you take the kids on Saturday and Sunday.
Oh, I thought it only came around once a year.
Well, in Vermont, I think it is. And as everybody, as we're nearing, the end of the hour, if there's any additional, questions from our audience, we really appreciate the participation, but we'd love to hear from you so we can make sure that we're all growing through the friction of this discussion. Angela, anything else comes to mind? Any updates? Have they flown in extra judges to catch up with the backlogs of evictions or?
Oh no. And actually, as of the first of the year, we're down 4. So
Alan, I think you need to get into the judicial system. We could use you.
Yeah, I'm going to stick with snowmobiling.
Yep.
We may have one more statement. Here we go. Susan Wickhard said, "Thank you for all you're doing, Alan," and I second that. I really appreciate your involvement in this. You definitely opened my eyes, so I appreciate it.
Yes, thank you.
Angela, anything else comes to mind that we should discuss today?
I don't think so, other than please, reach out to your legislative folks and start these conversations, not only with this lead paint stuff, but with all these housing bills that are floating around out there. We need to ease our development regulations. I think, registry and inspection bills have some concerns that, folks have identified on here. Though compared to past versions, they're probably the best version of these that I've seen in the almost 20 years I've been doing this. So, it's a little bit of this going on. And, keep an eye on the just cause stuff because that's going to have further impacts for rental properties around the state.
Yeah, and that's one that I think, again, on the surface, a lot of people could get behind. But Angela, I got to thank you again for all you do for our members, because when you give the perspective on that topic, on the surface, if you water ski it, it seems like something that's easy to get behind. When you compare it to other states having like 3-4 week evictions versus our 4 to 6 month evictions at best, at least that's my opinion. It's not nearly as understandable. A comment just from Marcia Marble, I'd say this in general, just stay on top of your legislators, vote no to S5. This may be a good call to VAR action item from an anonymous attendee. I completely agree, and we'll actually commit to reaching out to Peter Tucker and see what he can do to help us. I think he's doing a great job for VAR. Alan, I can't stress enough, thank you for your time. Any additional thoughts or questions for our members before we head off to either start snowmobiling or skiing or playing some of these dragons?
No, and thank you very much for having me here today. I was not aware of this series. I didn't know that I could catch up on all of them on YouTube. So I'm going to have to look into that when I sign off here. But I think it's terrific that you're out here talking about this and sharing these issues. And certainly, Angela is somebody I've known for years, and she's really quite knowledgeable on these things. So you have a very good set of instructors or advisors here.
Thank you,
folks, I want to thanks everybody for their patience with my attire today. But I want to also point out too, Angela, or to all of our members, if you've got ideas or topics on how we can bring you more value, bring more of interest, I've got a bunch that came up today as a result. So Alan, thank you again for your contributions. Angela, thank you so much for all that you're doing for property owners. Again, my name is Brian Armstrong with Strongwell Real Estate Team, Strongwell Property Management in KW, Vermont. I hope everybody stays safe and gets some time to enjoy this powder. We haven't seen enough of it. But with that being said, I got to get back to church.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Alan.
Take care, guys.
Bye.
See everyone next month.